What if the person you trusted most began to feel like a stranger? Claire Parker's mornings used to start with laughter and soft music echoing through their cozy Vermont kitchen. But lately, silence had replaced the songs. That morning, she stood by the window, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The snow outside sparkled under the early sun, yet inside everything felt dull. Ethan, her husband, had left early again. Another urgent meeting, another half-drunk cup of coffee sitting on the counter. She looked at his cup, her heart tightening. He used to wait for her to sit with him. Now he barely said goodbye. Something inside her whispered that the distance between them wasn't just emotional. It was real. But she didn't want to believe it. After 12 years of marriage, Claire thought love could survive quiet mornings and tired smiles. She got ready for work, forcing herself to smile in the mirror. "You're fine," she told herself. "You just need rest." But her reflection didn't look convinced. At the office, life moved fast. Phones rang, printers hummed, and people hurried past her desk. Claire worked as a senior designer at a marketing agency. Organized, dependable, respected. Yet lately her focus was slipping. Every email felt heavier, every meeting longer. Her coworkers noticed but stayed silent. Then came Daniel Reeves, the new project manager from Toronto. The kind of man who didn't try too hard to impress, yet everyone noticed him. Tall, soft-spoken, with calm gray eyes that seemed to read between words. Claire first saw him in a Monday meeting. He spoke with quiet confidence, offering solutions without stealing attention. Something about him felt steady. That afternoon, Claire was searching for an old campaign file. It was on the top shelf of the office storage cabinet, too high for her to reach. She stood on tiptoe, stretching her arm, when she heard a voice behind her. "Need help with that?" She turned, startled. Daniel stood there holding his coffee, a small smile on his face. "Oh, I'm fine," she said quickly, though she clearly wasn't. She laughed awkwardly. "Guess I'm shorter than I thought." He set his cup down and stepped closer, effortlessly reaching the file. "Then it's a good thing I'm tall," he said lightly. She thanked him, but her heart was pounding for no reason she understood. It wasn't attraction, it was awareness. The sudden awareness of someone noticing her when she hadn't felt seen in months. They exchanged a few polite words, nothing more. But as she turned back to her desk, her thoughts wouldn't settle. Daniel's kindness was simple, harmless, yet it lingered. Later that day, she caught herself smiling at nothing. And that scared her. She wasn't that kind of woman. She had a husband, a home, a life built on promises. But lately, those promises felt like fading ink. When the workday ended, Claire sat in her car for a long time before driving home. The snow was falling again, soft flakes dancing across her windshield. She thought about Ethan, about the late nights, the distracted replies, the way his phone always stayed face down. At dinner, she tried to bring it up gently. "You've been busy lately," she said, stirring her soup. "Everything okay at work?" He nodded, not looking up from his phone. "Yeah, just a new client. Deadlines. You know how it is." She did know. But she also knew when something was wrong. The distance wasn't from work. It was from her. That night, while he showered, Claire sat on the edge of the bed. She glanced at his phone on the nightstand. For a moment, she thought about checking it. But she didn't. She told herself trust mattered more than suspicion. Still, sleep didn't come easily. Her mind wandered back to Daniel. His calm eyes, his gentle tone, the way he'd said, "It's a good thing I'm tall." It was nothing. It should have been nothing, but in the quiet dark, even small things felt louder. The next morning, Ethan was already gone. The house was silent again. She sighed, wrapped herself in her coat, and headed to work. At the office, Daniel greeted her with a polite nod. "Morning, Claire. Need any help with the new client brief?" She smiled faintly. "No, I've got it, thanks." But part of her was grateful he'd asked. The hours slipped by. They worked side by side on a campaign, exchanging notes and ideas. He listened carefully, valued her input. When she joked about her outdated laptop, he laughed and said, "That's exactly what my mom says about her phone." For a brief moment, she forgot about the ache waiting at home. She forgot about unanswered messages and empty dinners. But then, as she was packing up to leave, something small but unforgettable happened. She dropped her folder near his desk, papers scattering across the floor. She bent down quickly to pick them up, and when she looked up, Daniel was there, kneeling beside her, helping gather the pages. For a heartbeat, they were close. Too close. Their hands brushed. Neither spoke. The air between them felt charged yet innocent. Then Daniel looked away and handed her the last sheet with a quiet, "Here." She took it, managing a shaky smile. "Thanks." He nodded, stepping back immediately. Professional, respectful. But the silence afterward felt different, heavy, meaningful. That night, Claire sat in her living room, the TV flickering softly. Ethan came home late again. No explanation, no warmth, just tired excuses and a cold kiss on her forehead. She watched him disappear upstairs, her chest tight. Why did she feel guilty for something that hadn't even happened? She turned off the TV and stared into the dark, her heart full of questions she couldn't ask. And then, as she picked up Ethan's jacket from the couch to hang it, his phone slipped from the pocket. The screen lit up for a second. A new message from an unsaved number. "Miss you already. Last night was incredible." Her hands trembled. The air left her lungs. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the glowing screen, unable to breathe. The house was silent. The snow kept falling outside, but inside her chest everything shattered. The next morning, Claire would have to decide, pretend nothing happened, or finally face the truth she'd feared all along. What if the love you thought was forever had already ended, and you were the last one to realize it? Claire stood frozen, staring at the glowing screen in her trembling hands. "Miss you already. Last night was incredible." The words sliced through her like cold glass. The sender's name wasn't saved, but the message was clear. Ethan, her husband, her partner of 12 years, was hiding something she could no longer deny. She sat on the edge of the couch, numb, her heart pounding in her ears. The house around her felt unfamiliar, like she'd stepped into someone else's life. Ethan's jacket still smelled like his cologne. The same scent that once comforted her now made her stomach twist. When he came downstairs minutes later, adjusting his tie, he barely noticed her expression. "You're up early," he said casually, sipping his coffee. Claire watched him in silence. She wanted to scream, cry, throw the phone. But instead she just asked softly, "Who were you texting last night?" Ethan paused mid-sip. A flicker of hesitation crossed his face, but he recovered quickly. "A client," he said. "You know how late they call sometimes." Her throat tightened. She nodded, pretending to believe him, though her heart knew better. When he left for work, the sound of the door closing felt final, like something had just ended without being said aloud. At the office, Claire tried to bury herself in work, but her mind replayed the text over and over. She smiled mechanically, answered emails she didn't read, and nodded through meetings she didn't hear. Daniel noticed. He stopped by her desk quietly. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. She blinked and forced a small smile. "Just didn't sleep well." He hesitated before saying, "You don't have to fake being fine, you know." Then he placed a coffee cup in front of her. 2 creams, no sugar. Exactly how she liked it. "Thought you might need this." That small gesture broke something inside her. She hadn't realized how long it had been since someone noticed her like that. Noticed what she needed without her asking. She whispered a quiet, "Thank you." And for the first time that day, her chest felt a little lighter. But guilt followed close behind. Every moment with Daniel now felt like a step closer to something she shouldn't want. Still, she couldn't stop herself. His kindness was a mirror, showing her what she'd been missing at home. Connection, attention, care. When she got home that night, Ethan was already there. He was scrolling through his phone, barely looking up when she entered. She took a deep breath. "Ethan, can we talk?" He looked up, frowning slightly. "About what?" "About us. she said, her voice trembling. "I found a message on your phone." His expression hardened. "You went through my phone?" "No," she said quickly. "It fell. I saw it by accident." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Claire, it's just a colleague. She was thanking me for helping with a proposal." Her heart twisted. "She said last night was incredible." Ethan looked frustrated, not guilty. "You're reading too much into it. Don't turn this into something it's not." But his eyes, those familiar blue eyes, didn't match his words. They shifted, avoided, deflected. Claire felt something inside her break. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Later, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of Ethan breathing beside her. Once that sound had comforted her. Now it felt like a wall between them. She turned away, tears pooling silently on her pillow. The next day she tried to act normal. She went to work, smiled at the receptionist, answered emails, and kept her distance from Daniel. But fate had other plans. During lunch, she sat alone at the office cafe, scrolling through her phone without seeing the screen. Then a message popped up, from Daniel. "You seemed upset yesterday. Are you okay?" Her first instinct was to ignore it. But something in his tone, gentle, not intrusive, made her reply. "Just a rough week. I'll be fine." Seconds later, his reply came. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here." No pressure. Claire stared at those words, her chest tightening. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't pity. It was genuine care, something she hadn't felt in months. She typed back slowly, "Thank you, Daniel." "That means more than you think." That night, she replayed their short exchange in her mind. Not because of romance, but because of warmth. The kind of warmth she used to come home to and no longer did. Ethan arrived late again. He claimed he'd been at the gym. His shirt smelled faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. She didn't ask. She didn't cry. She simply turned away, whispering to herself, "You're not crazy, Claire. You know what you saw." Days passed, and the distance grew louder. Ethan moved through the house like a guest. Daniel became the only person who truly asked how she was doing. They began exchanging short texts about work, then about music, and then, somehow, about life. She told him she used to paint before she got too busy being responsible. He told her he used to play piano before work took over his time. Their conversations were simple, but they brought her a strange peace. Still, every time her phone buzzed, she felt a sting of guilt. She wasn't doing anything wrong, yet she knew she was crossing a line her heart could feel. One afternoon, as she and Daniel walked out of a client meeting, rain started pouring suddenly. They ran under the awning, laughing breathlessly. For a brief second, the world felt light again. Claire looked at him and saw something in his eyes, understanding, not desire. She realized they were both lonely souls trying to remember how it felt to be seen. That moment lingered long after they said goodbye. When Claire got home, Ethan was waiting in the kitchen. "We need to talk," he said flatly. She froze. "About what?" He glanced at her phone on the counter. "About Daniel Reeves." Her breath caught. "What about him?" Ethan folded his arms. "You've been distant, secretive. Don't think I haven't noticed." Claire stared at him in disbelief. The irony stung so deep it almost made her laugh. "You're accusing me?" she whispered. "After what I found on your phone?" He said nothing. The silence said everything. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You lost me long before Daniel ever tried to understand me." She walked past him, leaving the room in quiet fury. Upstairs, she closed the door and pressed her back against it, her breath shaking. Her phone buzzed again. She wiped her eyes and looked. A message. From Daniel. "Are you okay? You don't have to face everything alone." Her chest tightened. Claire stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the screen. She knew that replying could change everything, but staying silent might hurt even more. What if the person who made you feel alive wasn't the one you promised forever to? Claire sat in her dark bedroom, staring at Daniel's message on her phone. "You don't have to face everything alone." The words glowed softly, almost like a lifeline. Her heart ached, not just from betrayal, but from loneliness. For weeks she had felt invisible in her own marriage. And here was someone who noticed her silence before she even spoke. She hesitated for a long time before replying. "Thank you, Daniel. I just don't know what to do anymore." His reply came almost instantly. "You don't need to figure it out tonight. Just breathe." Something inside her eased. No judgment, no questions, just understanding. It was strange how a man she barely knew could read her pain so clearly when the man she loved couldn't even look her in the eye. From that night, their messages became a quiet rhythm in her life. They didn't talk about love or marriage. They talked about small things, late-night thoughts, favorite songs, childhood dreams. And slowly, Daniel became her safe place in a world that felt like it was falling apart. Every morning, Claire promised herself she'd stop talking to him. Every night, she broke that promise. At work, they tried to keep things professional, but it wasn't easy. Their eyes found each other in meetings, in passing hallways, in moments that didn't need words. Daniel never crossed a line, yet his silence spoke more than any confession could. One evening, the office was nearly empty. Rain tapped against the tall windows, and thunder rolled faintly outside. Claire stayed late, finishing a project for a demanding client. Daniel was still there, typing quietly across the room. The glow from the monitors painted soft light across the walls. When he noticed her sigh, he looked up. "You've been staring at that screen for an hour." "Take a break," he said gently. She smiled faintly. "Deadlines don't wait." He stood, walked over, and handed her a cup of coffee. Neither does exhaustion. Their fingers brushed for just a second, but it felt like a spark in the dim light. Claire looked at him, eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper she couldn't name. "You always know when I need this," she whispered. He smiled softly. "Maybe I just pay attention." The rain grew heavier. Lightning flashed through the glass, and the world outside disappeared into silver haze. Inside, everything slowed down. Just her, him, and the quiet hum of the computers. Claire set her coffee down, her voice trembling. "Daniel, I don't know what's happening. I shouldn't feel like this." He shook his head gently. "You haven't done anything wrong." "But it feels wrong," she said, almost to herself. "Because I don't think about Ethan anymore. I think about this." Daniel's eyes softened. "You're human, Claire. You're just trying to feel seen again." Tears burned behind her eyes. She didn't want pity, but the truth in his words cut through her defenses. For the first time, she admitted it, not aloud, but deep inside. She wasn't just broken. She was lonely. He took a slow breath. "You don't owe anyone perfection. You just owe yourself honesty." For a moment, she couldn't move. The room felt too small for everything she felt. The guilt, the comfort, the ache of being understood too late. Then, Daniel stepped back, creating distance between them. "Go home, Claire. Don't make decisions when your heart's heavy." She nodded, tears slipping down silently. "Thank you for everything." He smiled faintly. "Get some rest." As she walked to the elevator, her heart raced. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet she felt as if she had crossed an invisible line. A line of emotion, not action, but still too close to danger. The next morning, she tried to focus on her work. Ethan was still distant, still distracted. She had stopped asking questions. His lies didn't need answers anymore. At lunch, her coworkers laughed and talked about weekend plans. Claire sat quietly, stirring her coffee, lost in thought. Then she looked up, and there was Daniel across the cafeteria, smiling politely at someone else. Something twisted inside her. She wasn't jealous, just reminded of how easily he noticed people. She wondered if someone else now noticed him the way she did. That afternoon, she caught him by the elevator. "About last night," she began, her voice soft. "Thank you for being kind." "I just don't want this to get weird," he nodded. "It won't. I respect you, Claire. More than you realize." His tone was calm, professional, but his eyes told a different story. One of restraint, care, and unspoken connection. Days passed, and Claire tried to draw lines around her feelings. She stopped replying to his late messages. She avoided staying late at the office, but every small gesture, A smile, a coffee, a simple good morning chipped away at her resolve. Then, one Friday evening, everything changed. The team had a client dinner. Afterward, most people left, but Claire and Daniel stayed behind to finish a report that was due the next morning. The office was quiet, almost peaceful. At one point, she sighed and rubbed her temples. "I can't think straight anymore," she muttered. Daniel leaned against the desk. "Then don't. Just breathe." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Why do you always say that?" "Because it works," he said softly. Claire laughed weakly, shaking her head. "You make it sound easy." "Nothing's easy," he replied, "especially when your heart's in the wrong place." Her laughter faded. Their eyes locked, and neither looked away. Time slowed. The distance between them disappeared, not physically, but emotionally. Everything unspoken hung in the air like a fragile secret. "I don't know who I am anymore," Claire whispered. Daniel's voice was steady, quiet. "You're someone who deserves peace." Tears filled her eyes. The rain outside mirrored the storm inside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There was no touch, no promise. Just silence heavy with everything they felt but couldn't say. And then, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Claire froze. The door creaked open, and she turned slowly. Ethan stood in the doorway, holding an umbrella, his expression unreadable. "Claire," he said quietly, his voice almost trembling, "we need to talk." The room went silent. Daniel straightened immediately, stepping away from her desk. Claire's pulse thundered in her ears. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Ethan's eyes flicked between them, then settled on her. "Can we go home?" Claire nodded slowly, her hands shaking. Daniel looked away, giving her the smallest understanding nod. She followed Ethan out of the office, her mind spinning with panic, guilt, and confusion. Every step felt heavier than the last. Outside, rain poured harder, blurring the city lights. She couldn't tell if her heart was breaking or waking up. That night, when Ethan finally spoke the truth she'd been dreading, Claire realized the storm outside was nothing compared to the one waiting inside their home. What if the truth you feared most finally came out, and you realized it wasn't just the end, it was also your beginning? The rain was still falling when Claire stepped into the house that night. The silence inside was sharp, almost too loud. Ethan placed his umbrella by the door, his jaw tight. She followed him into the living room, her heart beating like a drum. Neither spoke for a long moment. The air felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Finally, Ethan turned to her. "Claire," he said softly, "I think we both know things haven't been right for a long time." She swallowed hard. "You mean since you started lying to me?" He looked away, rubbing his hands together. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It was just loneliness. I made mistakes." Her chest ached. "You didn't just make mistakes, Ethan. You made choices." For a long moment, he said nothing. The man she'd shared her life with now looked like a stranger. The silence stretched until she couldn't bear it anymore. "Was it love?" she asked quietly. "The woman from those messages. Did you love her?" He shook his head quickly. "No, it wasn't about that. It was a distraction, that's all. But you..." His voice broke slightly. "You were gone long before that. You stopped looking at me like I mattered." Claire's breath caught. "You stopped being the man I could look at." The words hung between them like glass. Fragile, dangerous. For a while, neither moved. Then Ethan sighed. "Maybe we both just lost our way." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Maybe," she whispered, "but I was still trying to find us." "You were trying to forget us." He didn't deny it, and that silence was her answer. Later that night, after the argument faded into quiet exhaustion, Ethan fell asleep on the couch. Claire sat by the window, watching the rain blur the city lights. Every drop felt like a memory washing away. She thought about Daniel. His kindness, his patience, his words that had given her strength when she had none left. She didn't love Daniel. Not yet. But she loved the person she became when she was around him. Stronger, clearer, alive. By morning, The decision was made in her heart, even if she hadn't said it out loud. She packed a small bag. Not everything, just enough to breathe again. When Ethan woke, she stood by the door. "I'm leaving for a while," she said quietly. He didn't argue. He just nodded, defeated. "Will you come back?" She hesitated. "I don't know." He nodded again, eyes glistening. "I'm sorry, Claire. So am I," she whispered. And then she walked out. The days that followed were both strange and freeing. She stayed at a small rental apartment near the edge of town. It was quiet, clean, with white curtains and a balcony overlooking the trees. For the first time in years, she woke without fear of what mood her husband might be in. But freedom came with its own loneliness. She missed the routine, the familiarity, even the small arguments. Yet beneath the ache was something new. Peace. At work, she avoided Daniel for the first few days. She needed to face her own life before stepping into someone else's light. But Daniel, being who he was, gave her space. No pressure, no questions, just quiet understanding. One afternoon, she found a note on her desk. "You don't have to run from healing. It's allowed to hurt first." No name. But she knew who wrote it. She smiled faintly and folded it into her notebook. A week later, she resigned. She didn't tell anyone except Daniel. When she handed him her resignation letter, he looked surprised but not disappointed. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded. "I need a fresh start. Away from all this." He looked down, then back up. "I get it. You deserve it." For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Claire said softly, "You were there for me when no one else was." "I won't forget that." Daniel smiled, a gentle, bittersweet smile. "I didn't do much. I just listened. Sometimes that's everything," she said. He nodded. "Then I'm glad I could be that." As she turned to leave, he said one last thing. "Claire, I don't know what your next chapter looks like, but I hope it's peaceful." She smiled through tears. "For the first time, I think it might be." Weeks passed. The snow melted into spring, and the air smelled of new beginnings. Claire spent her mornings walking along the river, her evenings reading on the balcony. Slowly, she began to rediscover herself. One morning, she looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, but because she finally looked alive. She still thought of Ethan sometimes, not with anger, but with quiet acceptance. They had loved, they had broken, and now they were learning to let go. She even thought of Daniel, wondering if he'd found his own peace too. One day, as she was sipping coffee on her balcony, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Daniel. Just wanted to say thank you for being honest. I'm moving to Seattle next week for a new job. I hope life brings you everything you deserve." She smiled softly, typing back, "Thank you, Daniel, for reminding me what kindness looks like. I hope you find what you're looking for, too." As she hit send, she looked up at the sky. The sun was breaking through the clouds, warm and golden. For the first time in years, she didn't feel empty. She felt ready. That evening, Claire returned to her old house, not to move back, but to close a chapter. Ethan opened the door, surprised but calm. They talked for hours, not as husband and wife, but as two people finally being honest. They agreed to end things quietly, kindly. There were no harsh words, no blame left to throw, just two tired hearts finding closure. When she walked out for the last time, the air felt lighter. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because sometimes endings aren't failures. They're beginnings in disguise. Months later, Claire stood at the edge of the same river where she'd once cried. The wind brushed through her hair, carrying away the last pieces of who she used to be. She smiled. A small, quiet smile that came from somewhere deep inside. She was alone but not lonely, because she'd finally learned the truth. You don't need someone to complete you. You only need to remember who you were before you forgot yourself. As Claire walked away from the river, a soft voice called her name from behind. She turned and froze. The familiar warmth in that voice made her heart skip a beat. It was Daniel.